Hello, this is Hunter McDermott with another Anyone Could Play Guitar video. This one is another response to a viewer question. The question, they were asking me if I could explain common chord symbols and types that you'll find when you're learning tunes. The more official name for chord symbols is nomenclature. The great jazz educator Jamie Aebersold has a fantastic handout that appears in a lot of his books that describes the nomenclature. It shows the type of chord and all the various different ways to write that same chord and similar chords. So I will link to that in the description. You can go check that out to kind of have a visual and something to reference in the future. But we're going to cover a lot of that stuff in this video. It's not completely exhaustive. I just kind of want to cover a lot of the common ones that you hear in various forms of music. So to start this off, rather than jumping right into the symbols, I want to cover some various chord qualities. So a lot of the symbols that we'll look at are just either describing the quality of the chord or describing a modification to a bass type of chord. So it's important that we understand that base set before we look at how to modify them. So we'll start with the major chord. As we learned from our first series on music theory basics, we talked about triads, and a major chord is an example of a major triad. It's one of the handful of different triads there are, and it's kind of the most basic form. What you're doing is you're taking a major scale, and then you're taking the first, third, and fifth notes of that scale, and you're applying them all together. And when they play together, you are playing a chord, and the chord that you're applying is major. So if we, for example, took the key of C major, then we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So the first note is C, third note is E, fifth note is G, and you mash them all together and you play them on the guitar or any instrument, you get a C major chord. So a lot of the other qualities that we'll look at are just kind of modifications of this. So where there is a major chord, there must also be a minor chord. And what we do there is we take the major triad and we just flat the third. So this flat third is going to signify a chord with a minor quality to it. There are lots of different minor chords and minor modes and all this kind of stuff that we talked about, and that all kind of hinges upon this note, this third being flatted, being lowered. So another one we have talked about is the diminished chord. And it is further flatting notes of this major chord here. So we have a 1, a flat 3, just like the minor, but then we also have a flat 5. So we're flatting all kinds of stuff, and that gives us a diminished chord. One we haven't talked about yet, I don't believe, is the augmented chord. And rather than flatting notes, we will be sharping, in this case, the fifth. So if you take a major chord and you raise the fifth, then you get an augmented chord. And then a couple other ones we have are the half diminished chord. So these are no longer triads. We've kind of covered the main 3-note chords that you'll see. And so in order to cover the last couple here, we have to add one extra note to our chord. So we have, in the case of half diminished, we have a 1, a flat 3, a flat 5, and we add a flat 7 to it. So you can see that at its core, we have a diminished chord, 1, flat 3, flat 5, but then we're also adding a flat 7. Another name for this chord that we learned in the 7th chords video is minor 7, flat 5. So it's taking a 4-note chord, with a flat 3 and a flat 7, which would be a minor 7 chord, and we're flatting the 5th as well. But the another name for it is half diminished. And then the final main chord quality to cover is the dominant chord. And similarly, we need 4 notes to define this one. And this is effectively a major chord with a flat 7. And that gives us something called dominant, and there are different versions of dominant chords that we'll look at here. But pause the video and just take a moment to make sure you fully understand these different qualities, kind of this umbrella under which all the rest of the stuff will fall. And then we'll move on. So here we go. All right, so now to get into the actual purpose of the video, which is the nomenclature part of it. So in other words, we have a major chord and we want to tell somebody on a piece of paper, we want to write out or type out that we want them to play a major chord. So how do we do that? We're going to let's just use C for every example. That'll be fun. So in its simplest form, a major chord, a C major chord, looks like this. It's just the letter C. And it's always given as a capital letter. So that's a capital letter C. So that means if you see this on a piece of music, you have to think, okay, I see just the letter. I don't see any modifications, nothing else telling me anything. So that must be a major chord. And that would be, here, let me just keep a tally of these. And that would be 1, 3, and 5. So that's major. All right, that's C major. So if we want to start to modify these, we can make this a C minor chord. C minor is usually C. Actually, more technically, I should do a kind of a lowercase looking M. All right, so that's a C with a lowercase m. And that would be your minor chord. These are things we've probably already seen if you're picking up tabs or looking at chord charts or something like that. You see major and minor more than you see anything else, right? Those are the big two. When it comes to the diminished chord, so if we want C diminished, then we have, pretty straightforward, we have Cdim, and that's all lowercase. So the case matters often. We have a capital letter to indicate the quality of the chord, the overall, like the root note basically, and then the rest of it is given in lowercase letters so as not to detract from how you're reading it. Did it again. All right, so the next one would be the augmented chord. So if we have C, then we just do aug. Or you can also write this with a plus sign. So sometimes you see augmented as C plus, like that. And again, what that is it's a major chord with a sharp 5. And the name augmented is kind of written already there for you. All right, so covering the rest of the overarching chord qualities, there we have the half diminished chord. And so this can be written a couple of different ways. Often you'll see it with this kind of symbol, C half diminished. I don't know the technical term for that symbol. Or a more descriptive way to call this would be minor 7 flat 5. And I like that because it's very descriptive. You have a C minor chord with a 7. We'll get into 7s a little bit more in a minute. And then you have a flat 5. And a lot of the chords, symbols that we'll see coming up will be kind of like this, right? Once you get past the kind of, okay, I know what a plain letter means, I know what the small m means, I know what dim means, things like that. Then it just becomes, now we're tacking things on or making modifications to it, which is exactly like what we have here. So this is also, they're both the right answer, but I personally like this because it's just a little bit more descriptive. Hey, you're playing a C minor 7 chord with a flat 5. It just says it right there in the name. And then the final one of the big group that we started with is dominant 7. And this is just C7. So that's a 1, 3, 5, and a flat 7. And so this is known as dominant. Make sure I don't obscure it there. Dominant. All right, so the critical part of the dominant chord is the 7. And really of any seventh chords. So we'll go into sevenths here in a second, but the key is the 7, if we're playing a seventh chord, is assumed to be there. So if we go to C and we want to play a major 7 chord, we can write MAJ7. That's pretty common. Or sometimes in like a jazz chart, you'll see just a triangle. Or even sometimes a triangle and a 7. And what that's telling you is to play a major 7 chord. That was kind of, again, I tend to prefer the more descriptive looking names, right? You have to remember what the triangle is. Not that it's that hard to do, but MAJ7 is pretty obviously major 7. It just kind of says it for you. If we play we already covered dominant 7, so that's just C7. If we do a minor 7, we have C minor, just like a regular minor chord, and then we have a 7 on it. So C minor 7. This is minor 7. And this is dominant 7. Now, another way that a minor 7 chord is written, sometimes you see instead of the M7, you'll see a dash 7, like that. So C minor 7. I don't know if that's just for ease of writing. It's easier to just do a little dash than it is to write an M. I don't know, but you'll see that sometimes as well. So these are both examples of minor 7. We looked at C minor 7 flat 5, which is an example of a half diminished. So what would be a fully diminished chord? So this would just be C diminished 7. And this is, similar, kind of related to the half diminished thing. It's that little, almost looks like a degree symbol, except it doesn't have the strike through. So this is diminished 7. So this is a flat 3, a flat 5, and then we actually flat the 7 2 times. That gives us a diminished 7. Sometimes you'll see dim 7. I find that this is much more common than to see it written out like that. Let's see. All right, so that covers basically your seventh chords, just about. So some other common things here would be adding extensions. So I just want to make a special note of this. So what I mean by extensions is when we're building chords, there's kind of a cutoff point. If you think about a major scale, we have 7 different notes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the 8th note, if we were going to continue, would be the same as the first note, which means the 9th note would be the same as the 2nd, 10th would be the same as the 3rd, and so on and so forth. So what you can do when you're building chords is you can keep going. You can go, okay, I got the 1. So you can see the pattern. We're skipping every other note when we build chords. We're stacking thirds is what we're doing. We're playing every other note. So 1, 3, 5, 7. That's kind of the core group. But then we can keep going and we can say, well, we could have a 9. We can have an 11. So 9 is the same as 2. 11 is the same as 4. And then we can also go to 13, which would be the same as 6. And that's where it stops. Because if you go to 15, 15 is the same, would be the same note as 1. So you've got 7 pitches here. You're just spreading them out. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right. If you can imagine it on a piano, if you were playing all the notes of a C major scale in one octave, so you're playing the C and the D and the E and the F all right next to each other, you're just kind of mashing a bunch of keys that are really close together. It's going to create, I won't say it's not good, but it's not going to be very clear what you're doing. It really kind of just sounds like you're mashing your hands on the keys, right? But if you were to take those notes and spread them out and go, instead of 1, 2, 3, I'll do 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, and spread them out maybe across 2 hands and play those with spaces in between, you are stretching the chord out, and it's going to sound a lot more pleasing because you've got this space separating the notes. It's more clear what pitches you're hearing. It's easier for your ear to pick up on. And that follows with the way that we define these extensions from a theory standpoint. We don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We go every other note to spread them out. So then when I'm talking about extensions, what I'm really referring to is this group here, 9s, 11s, and 13s. So let's say we have a C dominant 7, but we want to add a 9 to it. So we do this, C9. So you'll notice that I haven't written MAJ. This is not a major 9. I didn't write a small m, so it's not a minor 9. It is just what they call a dominant 9th chord. And what this means is that it's assuming that all of this stuff is there. It's assuming that we have a 1, a 3, a 5, and then actually a flat 7, and then we're adding a 9 on top of it. All right, so in contrast, so this is a dominant 9. So in contrast, let's say we wanted to do that same thing. We want to throw a 9 into the chord, but we don't want a flat 7. We just want to add a 9. Well, what do? This is a chord that you see frequently in guitar music. You say C add 9. So whereas the dominant 9 is a 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, emphasis on this note here, add 9, as the name suggests, is a C major chord with a 9 added to it. So it's important to make that distinction because a flat 9 is going to give this chord some tension. It's going to basically change the whole color of the chord. So don't feel like you have to do that in order to throw a 9 in. You can just skip that note altogether and add the 9, and it's going to give you a totally different sounding chord. It's going to be a little prettier, closer to a major sound, and less of a dominant sound. So if I were to replace this 9 with an 11, C11 or C13, it's the same principle. So we're assuming that the flat 7 is there. 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and then 11. Or 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 13. So we're adding this note with the assumption that or the expectation that the flat 9 is there. If you just want an 11 added to it or a 13 added to it, then you could use add 11, add 13, something like that. So more commonly, if you were going to say a 13, like C, and you wanted to add a 13 to it, more often than not, you would just call it a C6. Because, again, going back to the extensions idea, the idea behind a 13 is kind of assuming that there's a lot of stuff in between, like you're playing a C chord, and there's a 7, and maybe some other extensions, 9s or 11s, and then you're adding that 13. You don't need the 9 and the 11, but you're kind of assuming that you've got a 4-note chord with a 13 added to it. But if you just want to throw the 13 in, which is the same as 6, right, be the same scale degree, then you could just call it a C6 chord. And you don't have to worry about the 7 and the 9 and the 11 because you're not playing those notes. So this would be just 1, 3, 5, and then 6. That's it. All right. So some more common chords that you see in guitar music especially, you'd see something like sus, C sus. Now what this means is either 2 or 4. So sus stands for suspended. And so what that means is you are not playing a 3, but instead you are playing a 2 or a 4. So that would be either 1, 2, 5, or 1, 4, 5. Now, the reason why we call it suspended, and if you go to your guitar and you try to play a C suspended 2 or a C suspended 4, and the way you would do that is you'd find the third and you'd raise it up or lower it. So it would be either C, D, G, or C, F, G. In other words, you're omitting the third altogether. Then it's going to have kind of an unsettled sound. It's going to sound nice, but it's going to sound like it kind of isn't anywhere, right? It's not really landing anywhere. So for example, if I have D, not plugged in, but we have D here, and if I do a suspended 4 chord, or a suspended 2, I'm omitting the third in favor of the 2 or the 4. In fact, if you know Tom Petty, Free Falling, goes suspended 4, suspended 2. Right, he's kind of just playing around with moving that note up and down. But that's something that you often hear to kind of create a sense of pre-resolution. You're not quite resolving the chord, but you're about to, and so you're creating this nice little suspended sound that will eventually resolve to a straight-up major chord. So that's how suspended works, and you'll see that a lot in pop tunes. Let's see. It's just about everything I wanted to cover. The last little bit would be adding alterations. Quick note, back to the ninths thing. Instead of doing a dominant 9, you can do major 9, you can do minor 9. Any of that stuff works, right? Same thing, you can do C major 11, C minor 13, right? You can add those extensions on to the end of the chord. But the critical part is you have to tell us what kind of chord it is. This is a major chord with a 9 added. This is a minor chord with a 9 added. If we just did C9, that is a dominant chord with a 9 added. So they don't have any words in there. You might sometimes see DOM, dom, but I almost never do. So if you just see the letter and the number, it's going to be a dominant chord. If it's an extension, a 7, 9, 11, or 13. Otherwise, it could just be a 6. So there's no 7, it just goes to 6 and then stops. All right, so then to wrap it up would be alterations. So again, we've covered a lot of this already. So if I have a C chord, this is a C major, 7. The MAJ is important here because if I omitted it, it would look like a dominant 7 chord, so I have to say it's major. And then if I want to sharp the 5, I just say sharp 5, right? You might say augmented 5th, but really what you're doing is you're sharpening the 5. That's what you're doing. So that's what we would write. So these become a lot more self-explanatory. So if we have a C7 chord and we want to add a flat 9 to it, we just say C7 flat 9. Right? You can do, let's see, you can do sharp 9 as well. You could do, sharp 9, sharp 5, flat 5, all kinds of different things like that. And those are just alterations. So you're taking a core symbol that you already understand and you're just making a modification to it. So where these modifications, what they rely upon is your knowledge of what the bass is. So I kind of break this into pieces. I say, okay, well, C is my root. So I'm thinking C major, and then it says major 7, so it's a C major chord with a 7 added to it. And then we're sharpening the 5, so taking 1, 3, 5 and sharpening it, raising that note as well. In this case, it's a C, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 3, 5, and then it's got a 7, so it's a dominant 7. That means it has a flat 5, and then we're adding to it a flat 9. And same thing here with a sharp 9. So it's taking that kind of core set of symbols that we looked at the beginning, and we're just making modifications to it. So that's where we're going to end for today, because that's again not exhaustive, kind of like the scales video we did last week. It's not completely exhaustive, but it doesn't really need to be. The idea is that you've given a taste and kind of a broad overview of the constituent parts that make up these different chord names. So you should be able to recognize many more of what these are. And then if it's something that you haven't seen, likely what you're seeing is going to be a modification to something. So if you haven't ever seen a sharp 5, but you've seen C major 7, well, it's kind of self-explanatory. It's a C major 7 chord with a sharp 5 to it. So things like that. And you can add multiple alterations. You can do flat 9, flat 13, or whatever, right? You can add as many things as you can conceivably alter in any given chord. So yeah, that's pretty much it, covering the broad nomenclature. I'm going to link to that PDF from Jamie as well, so you have a little bit of a review of some of this stuff. I wasn't exhaustive. His sheet isn't exhaustive, so you can certainly look up some of this stuff if you ever come across something that you don't understand, but I believe this video will give you a pretty good baseline knowledge for most of the things that you're going to want to play. All right, but anyway, leave me some questions about this stuff. If you have questions that you want unrelated to this, that you want maybe a new video to be about, check out the Ask Me Questions video, and for details, email me, send me your questions, and I'll get to them. And keep them coming. This has been great. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.